concept I want to talk about, the manifestation ladder. I was telling my buddy Chethan this earlier today, that there are eventualities that can't exist unless you put your attention on them. And what manifestation is putting your attention on positive eventualities that wouldn't exist unless you put your attention on them. That's what manifestation is. Or at least I think there could also be negative manifestation as well. But obviously we all want positive manifestation. I'm not trying to manifest negative things. But the way that you put your attention on the negative things is by starting with humility. What humility is making space in your world model for potential error. Specifically, the idea, I call it a shadow loop. The prisoners in the cave from Plato's parable with the shadows on the wall. These people saw shadows and they thought the shadows were real. They didn't understand that there could be anything else. They had no grid for knowing that there are other ways of perceiving the world. So they thought they had a complete picture, and I call that a shadow loop. Specifically, I call it a shadow loop because it's a logical loop. It's a thing that makes sense on its face. It's like 2 + 2 = 4. Something that seems dead obvious to you because it fits, like you have an interpretation of reality that fits reality as you have seen it, as the people around you have seen it in many cases. And so, and what happens usually in the shadow loop is when you encounter things in the world that don't match your world model, usually it's not actually a signal to you that your world model is wrong. Usually it's actually an affirmation that you are right and everyone else is wrong. This is usually the key characteristic of a shadow loop. And a famous and obvious example of a shadow loop is sociopathy. It's a really common negative archetype that happens frequently in society, and everyone knows about it. And the difference between a psychopath and a psychopath is nature, sociopath is nurture. So a sociopath is somebody who was either taught or learned to think and act as if morals don't matter and the rules and laws of society don't matter, and they or don't benefit from having empathy. That's like a sociopath. That's somebody who's learned to think that way. And that's a shadow loop. It is a logical chain of reasoning that makes sense on its face. And also every time that they encounter something in the real world that might cause them to doubt their suppositions, for example, somebody who is kind and has empathy and is still successful in life, usually to them it is a clear and obvious affirmation that they are right and everyone else is wrong, because they think you're just a sucker. They think you're so that's the idea of a shadow loop. And this perspective that I was talking about, I forgot what I was talking about at the beginning. LOL. This perspective is not indelible because you can free somebody from a shadow loop. You just have to show them the logical opposite loop of whatever it is that they are, whatever they believe to be true. And you can also demonstrate that it's better. And I do believe that the minimizing dynamic is, I don't think I have a word for what is the opposite of a shadow loop, a positive loop. I don't know. I think it's not really always a binary. There are often multiple parallel logical interpretations that disagree with each other, but also full circle enough to where you might believe that your way of viewing it is right and everyone else's is wrong. It could be very variable, but I think there are some dichotomous binaries like this. Specifically, the minimizing thing is minimizing as a worldview. It's not a reflex. I think we've been taught to think that it's a reflex, minimizing loss. There's all this psychology about negativity bias and loss aversion, and it's essentially taught in our culture that minimizing loss is a natural part of psychology, not that it's a negative way of viewing the world. I don't know. Usually the loss aversion stuff is used in the context of losing money, but accepted as a truism that applies across all domains of life, that losing things hurts more than gaining things. It's negativity bias. I think that's what negativity bias means. And so humility as a world model means that you leave space for the possibility that you might be wrong. You understand that shadow loops exist and you might be in one of them. So what humility as a world model is essentially like, it's a validation-based world model. You try to validate your suppositions and you do it all the time. And this is why actually usually maximizing gain and minimizing loss are perceived by people who minimize loss usually perceive maximizing gain as being something that is dangerous or unsafe or takes too much effort. Because, for example, in the case of being humble, what it means to be humble is to constantly check your fucking bases, make sure they're correct. And what that means, but because humility is the idea, there is no penalty for having a wrong world model. There's only a penalty for not having it right. So you can enlist other people to help. And this is the power of the humility model. That's why it scales, is because you do it all the time. It feels dangerous and unsafe, though, to people in the minimizing model, because people who minimize, because it's something that you do all the time. It's not a single decision that you make once. You have to be vigilant. You have to stay on top of it. They perceive that as being way more work, and they're like, nah, that doesn't seem right, doesn't seem better. But what they don't get is that you accelerate. You keep your gains and you can grow them over time. Fuck, I forgot what I was saying. But so you... Wow, so I digress. I was talking about a lot of random stuff there. But the manifestation ladder, coming back to that, is the idea that you can walk your perceptions up the positive eventuality curve. And every time you do walk your steps up the positive eventuality curve, it allows you to be in a position to find the puzzle pieces of reality, to find another more positive interpretation, or a more positive eventuality, and manifest that. And then that's how you climb the manifestation ladder. I think there's also a real parallel between humility as a world model and science, because humility seeks the truth and it is collaborative. Although we can debate how collaborative science is in practice, but it's the same sort of spirit of open collaboration. It creates better world models that everyone can participate in. So the next place I'm going is talking about how humility as a world model algorithm, but I don't know how deep the minimizing loss goes as a perspective, not just in social life, but also in society. I think there are a lot of things in society that are built around minimizing loss as if it is a necessary part of perception in society. It's almost like a political science thing sometimes. I also have a supposition that being humble is inherently a collaborative activity. And I don't think I have actually worked this out entirely yet, but I think it has something to do with the fact that you specifically don't care about competence or performance because your values are not built around that, which they are under pride. Because under pride, you believe that you already perceive the world well. That's what it means to be proud, is that you don't have any reason to suspect that your world model is incomplete. So you are prescriptive when you interact with other people. This is how it is. And the belief that you are already correct as a default naturally, inherently leads to people not wanting to be around you unless you are otherwise nice to be around. I guess what I mean to say is it's very unlovable behavior. This is not the final way I will say this, I think, but pride assumes a correct interpretation of the world, which in turn assumes that you are desirable and or valuable because you have good perceptions, good interpretations, which in turn leads to the belief that you are valuable because you are competent, because you can perform, which in turn means that you would never draw attention to yourself unnecessarily, because this is why one of the main fears in the world, one of the most common phobias, is public speaking. It's because if you get up in front of a lot of people, really any people at all, but the more people, the worse it becomes if you make a mistake. It shows that you have bad perceptions. It shows that you are not competent. It shows that you're not a good performer, which means that you're actively devaluing yourself if you accidentally mess up in front of a bunch of people at the same time, which is why almost everyone, which I think under a pride model, you would never draw attention to yourself. Drawing attention to yourself is not something that you do. And then when under humility, there is no assumption of competence because there is no assumption of correct perception. And so your strength under humility comes from calling attention to the problems in your perception. And I think the way that you can tell that somebody is humble, or if they are just an attention seeker, is if they call attention to themselves or if they call attention to the problem in front of them, the problem in their perception. And also, this is where it starts to become beautiful and synergistic, is because you call attention to the problems in your perception, but those problems in your perception might also be problems in other people's perception. So you're doing everyone a favor by calling attention to it. You're asking the group to validate a perception that not just you have, but also like everyone else might have as well. You're literally doing everyone a favor at the same time. You call attention to problems in your perception. You call attention to the group project that is all of your perceptions working in harmony. And what that does is, especially, okay, this is where it starts to become, I think, in my opinion, a very beautiful and powerful, loving, cohesive, something that brings people together. A unifying way of thinking is, if the object of your desire is to speak with somebody who is to grow closer to other people, then the fact that you are asking them to help you in your perceptive model grow closer to them, they are actually subject matter experts in growing closer to them. They are the ones who know how to do it best. They can show you how to grow closer to them. And so they can help you do that. You can grow closer to them. But also, they will validate your world model and also validate the process of asking for that kind of help. And that is something that can snowball. It grows. The more people you get working on the problem, the more it grows. So a naturally leadership bound way of thinking where you want to call attention to things that people have in common. Obviously, in the case of relationships, that would be like that. The problem that you have in common is how to get closer to each other. How do you, as strangers, come closer? How do you, as people who already know each other, learn to trust and value each other more, etc.? But it's also just like you can. This is a natural segue into things that are not purely relational. How do we all accomplish something that we all want to do? It's a better model for leadership. I don't know. It's so interesting because there's so many things where I previously thought that it was a single thing, and now I'm starting to realize that I think there's two ways of seeing it. Like leadership, I thought leadership was one thing before. Now I'm realizing that I think it's actually two different ways of approaching leadership: maximizing and minimizing pride and humility. I guess pride and humility, but pride and humility are maximizing and minimizing. I think I like describing like a tree of dichotomies, possibly, or a tree of polarities. I'm not sure.
What's up, buddy? Hey,